Hello, everybody. Trust you're enjoying being part of Finacle Conclave so far. I'm Mohit Joshi, President Infosys and Chairman of the Board at EdgeVerve. It is my pleasure today to host Nestor Tan, Chief Executive Officer of BDO Unibank, the largest bank in the Philippines and among the most progressive banks in the region, for this fireside chat on driving purposeful growth, a CEO perspective. New post pandemic research shows that the nature of growth is under new scrutiny. Business success alone is not enough for customers to engage with certain banks. Customers want empathy and support from other banks. Underlying all of this is the larger expectation of a moral balancing of the prevailing profit focused approach against a more humanitarian view. This has an increased expectations for banks to play a societal role beyond shareholder returns through purposeful banking. Nestor is a distinguished banking business leader with over 4 decades of experience and heads up a dynamic organization in the region. He is thus best placed to help us understand the changing nature of the banking ecosystem, the emerging expectations from customers, and how banks should look to navigate their way ahead in the post pandemic new normal. Nestor, thank you again for making time to be with us here today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on this chat at Finacle Conclave.
Thank you, Mohit. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So, Nestor, BDO is among the largest, it is by far the largest bank in the Philippines and among the largest in the region. You've got a wide distribution network, you've got market leading positions in almost all the business lines. The pandemic has compressed growth rates for all businesses, profitability is on the spotlight, customers, employees, partners, larger societal needs. All of these are in some form or fashion, I wouldn't say conflicting, but colliding with each other. So there is the expectation that we said you have from a larger society, and there is the shareholder expectations that the bank will retain the market leading position, strengthen the bottom line further. From a BDO perspective, you've always had a motto of we find ways. So how are you finding an optimal balance between these varied dynamics and these different expectations from shareholders? What advice would you have for our delegates on this subject?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is that what we're experiencing here is probably a blip in a long series of blips that we will get. We look at our strategic performance over the long term. And one of the things that we have, again, as a luxury, is we have a very understanding shareholder group. One big difference that Asian banks have versus Western banks is that we normally have a majority shareholder who shares our view for the long term. And so we need to make sure that we communicate our priorities clearly. We keep it simple so that we always stick to what it is we're looking for. And from our perspective, it's always in the context of the market we're in. Financial inclusion is big. So it's growth for us, tempered by good profits to support investments in the future. So it's not always maximization of profit. We have to invest money in our growth.
So that's a very good advice, Nestor. Sort of the long-term perspective is so important. In fact, I'm reminded of a quote by an erstwhile chairman of Goldman Sachs, maybe from over 30 years ago, about the importance of being long-term greedy. That you have to have a long-term perspective, from a returns perspective, and not look to maximize every single cycle. And I guess that's what you're saying, that the long-term expectations of shareholders are in sync with the broader social expectations.
And I must add that while we are undergoing these difficult times, one of the things we should always appreciate is we're operating under the same conditions. So it's being the less blind of the blind in situations like this.
Yes, very much so. And Nestor, so I have, you and I have been interacting through the pandemic, and clearly 2020 has been far from normal for any bank globally. What have been your greatest learnings from this period of volatility, of turbulence, of change?
I think the way we look at it is that change is constant. So the pandemic is just a change. And the sooner that we're able to adjust, the better for all of us. So we have decided to, at an early stage, adjust to the existing conditions. We went ahead of the curve in opening the bank and getting a lot of people in. As you know, we're a service industry, so we can't really work from home as much as you can. And as you're aware, one of the things that we did is we resumed our strategic projects quite early in the lockdown. So we tried to do things virtually, and we've been successful thanks to people like you who's been helping us get through this process. But if I were to summarize it, number one is don't let it paralyze you, get on with it. And number two, the sooner you accept that this is the new way of operating, then the better off you are.
Right. So a bias for action,
Yeah.
getting a sense of the environment, but then very quickly moving on to execution would be your advice and your learning.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you, Nestor. And so, Nestor, we recently published a report on innovation in banking in association with EFMA. This is based on conversations with banks across the world. And without exception, the banks said that they were experiencing a sharp acceleration in digital adoption across customer segments. Could you tell us about what your experience has been and what kind of initiatives BDO is driving in this area?
I think there's a huge pickup in digital payments, but I must add that bank a bank is more than just payments. So my view was that digital payments was accelerated, but it's not going to spill over to the other parts of banking. Of course, in countries like ours, there are legal impediments. Can we really have a substitute or signature or a notarization as an example? So we have seen a pickup in activity around payments and information reporting. And therefore, our focus is really to make sure that we are able to provide those in the most efficient way. But all the others, what we're doing is just putting in enablers so that we can act quickly if the time should come.
Understood. Makes sense. And so, the payments point that you mentioned leads me to think about the competition landscape, right? And in banking, this has been evolving for the last many years. Uh, we've had challenger banks, fintechs, and several new non-banking finance companies being set up to expand the pie, but also to eat into the pie of the established banks,
Mhm.
especially in areas like payments. Digital giants like a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon are trying to establish their propositions as well. You're the CEO of the largest established bank in the country. What is your sense of these competitive threats? How is BDO ready to sustain its market leading position?
Well, I think going forward in some areas or some products, the boundaries will be blurred. And if I were to liken it to what we've seen before, the advent of technology is similar to the advent of investment management, wherein banks, trust departments have ended up competing with mutual funds, insurance companies, and other private equity funds. But what has happened as a result is that banks started to realize that their space is not in those areas. And they adopted what I call the open architecture. They collaborate and they buy products from them because they have the scale and they have the expertise. I think technology will go the same way, particularly around payments and processing. It will be blurred initially, but I can share with you our experience. It's very hard to make money off payments alone. You have to have the relationship. So when you combine the two, the question is which one will look like the other? Will a tech company look more like a bank, or will a bank look more like a tech company? And my view is that tech companies will probably be will probably look more like a bank. Okay, banks have the relationship, tech companies have the products. The question is which one will be commoditized first? And in my view, based on the experience I've seen, once there's an innovative tech product, it's just a matter of time and you have 3 or 4 providers trying to service the banks. The successful ones like Ant Financial will probably have to become a bank in some form or another. So what we're trying to do is just stick with our core competency, keep the relationship franchise we have, and make sure we're ready to react and collaborate as necessary.
That's a very good point. So what you're saying essentially is that the customer relationship that you've enjoyed for many decades is going to be quite sticky. At the same time, the fintechs or the tech companies, like we saw with Ant Financial, are going to come under a lot more regulatory pressure and regulatory scrutiny. So if banks are able to build an ecosystem perspective, like the investment management example you gave, and hold on to the customer relationship, they should come out very strong.
Yes, I believe that that's the secret. But the work is cut out for us. How do we maintain and keep that relationship satisfied?
Right. So actually, because you spoke about the importance of maintaining a customer relationship, but equally in the current situation, we see that credit losses or non-performing assets are going to increase, fairly significantly, and so there will equally be pressure from a cost control perspective. So you have to, do a level of cost control while maintaining investments to build on that client relationship, to build the ecosystem partnerships. How can banks look to improving the cost to income ratio in this scenario?
Well, I have to admit that we are not focused too much on cost income ratio. And let me step back. The cost income ratio, the analyst's view of cost income ratio, has been born out of mature markets wherein growth potential is quite limited and your ability to manage cost became paramount. In a growth market, I think the more important thing is actually top line growth relative to the industry. And I'm saying in a growth market like ours. So what we do is we focus on top line, similar to the way you look at same store sales and new store sales. You have to focus on both. The existing one has to be strong and the new one has to carry its own weight, which says from our perspective that investing in our future is key. We have about 65 to 70% of the market still unbanked. And it's a big task for us to go after that because it's harder to go after that once they've been banked by somebody else. And therefore, the investment is important. And the key is to focus on the investment and the top line and let the cost income ratio settle itself over time. Now, having said that doesn't mean that we do let cost income ratio get out of hand. We just need to make sure that we have a certain type of budget that we set aside for investing in our future.
Right. So there's significant headroom for growth, and again, it goes back to the answer you gave to the question about balancing social needs versus shareholder needs. Is the importance of taking a long-term perspective, and the long-term perspective, in your markets, clearly is incenting the organization to grow while obviously keeping an eye on the cost. But the focus is very much on growth, on financial inclusion, and building a much larger sustainable organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Nestor, now from a technology perspective, right? Because I know that this is a topic that you've been very passionate about and you're very hands-on from a technology perspective. How do you see the role of technology and the technology leadership team evolving in a banking organization? And what's been your experience at BDO?
Okay. From a banking perspective, we see technology as an enabler. Our experience is that technology moves a lot faster than the banking industry, that all you need to do is just be patient, and over time, technology will come to you. Okay? So for us, It's not a product, it's an enabler. But the challenge for us is how do we adopt quickly? So all of the possible products that our clients will need should be easily adapted to our existing operation. So what we've done is we have invested in platforms and a next generation set of platforms that will allow us to, if you don't mind my using the term, plug and play applications that we like to offer our clients. And our emphasis, therefore, is not on the product because the product convergence is happening very quickly. The emphasis is being nimble and being a fast follower. If we believe it's something that we need to be in, how quickly can we adopt our operation to source that product? And that is what we're putting emphasis on.
Makes sense. And again, I think this ties back to the point that you'd made earlier about open architecture and a willingness to embrace other solutions as well. But just to come back to the question, how important is it for you that your top team be technology sort of literate and be focused on technology? Is that an important thing you look at while considering your senior executive roles?
I would say a subset, definitely. Um, I'll give an example. Uh, People involved in lending should at least be aware of what tools there are that you can use. But they don't have to be aware of the difference between using a private cloud and a public cloud and all of those things. However, people in consumer lending, consumer banking, digital banking may have to be a little bit more literate. The important thing is that we know the trends in technology, its use, and its advantages. We don't necessarily have to be intimate with how they work, although it helps. However, our IT people need to be on top of their game. And that is where we encourage them to reach out. We have a term here, cast your net a little wider so that you can then gain knowledge from what's going on out in the real world.
Makes sense. And I think it's also related to the point that you've made in our previous conversations about, being agile, not just in terms of the actual software development methodology, but just in terms of responsiveness and the speed with which you run through and develop solutions. So it ties in with the imperative to be agile as well. Just coming back to the pandemic though, Nestor, it is influencing and accelerating various consumer and business shifts, both for banking and for the wider industry. And some of the trends that we've seen are probably going to define the industry for years to come. What is your sense of the emerging trends that will define banking in 2021 and beyond? What are the opportunities and challenges that you foresee from trends coming out of the pandemic, or maybe even trends that were apparent post-pandemic but have gotten speeded up now?
Well, in my view, banking has always been the same, and it's always been the same over the last 500 years. What has changed is actually how people do banking. And if I may just expand a little bit, people still make payments. The question then is, how then do you enable customers to make payments? And that is where technology will come in as an enabler. Banking is still around intermediation. Somebody has money, they want to lend it, they give it to banks. Banks lend money because they have the expertise. You do the credit. The question of credit is timeless. The manner by which you do it changes. Maybe it's before, it's who you know, how you understand the business by observing. Then you use financials. You have very smart people, accountants doing it. Now you have technology looking at behavior. But the concept of credit is still the same. So in my view, banking will probably be influenced by other industries in how it is conducted. But the basics of intermediation, the payments that comes with it, the custodial functions of holding your money and making sure that you optimize the use of it will be timeless. So it's upon us as banking practitioners to make sure we're aware of how people are providing the services we're offering.
And any thoughts on beyond banking into the broader economy, for Philippines, for the region? How do you expect this to be reshaped by the pandemic?
The pandemic for us is a definite setback in the growth and the production of the economy. But the thing that I am comfortable with, or I see some silver lining in, is that the entities, at least in Asia, that are the drivers of the economy continue to be strong. And I can speak on behalf of the Philippines and probably other countries similar to the Philippines, to the emerging markets. We are run by private conglomerates. And the private conglomerates here in Asia continue to be strong, continue to be liquid, and will be able to ride out the storm. Now, it is really key for the businesses within these conglomerates to start to adapt under the new conditions of the pandemic. And for us, it's probably a good mix of work from home and on-premise working environment. It's probably going to be a combination of digital and physical. It's probably going to be a combination of dispersed operating processes, but acting as one centralized operation. So it's a combination of things that, frankly, if we are able to learn from what happened, will make us stronger. But financially, I think the people that can carry the economy going forward remain strong and solid.
That's a much needed voice of optimism, Nestor. It really is very positive, and clearly your expectations of growth, both in the Philippines and the broader regional and emerging market economy, are very positive, and that's really good to hear. So I just want to ask you that you've had an instrumental role to play in the growth and development of BDO in your 20 years in the organization in various capacities.
Mhm.
What are some of the key leadership reflections, from what is clearly a remarkable journey? And what is your vision for BDO over the next few years?
Well, I think I will sum up. I've been in the bank for 20 plus years. And I can probably, things that I learned over the years, that for us to succeed, we need teamwork, we need creativity, because we need to understand how we do things. We need determination, clearly. It's for the long haul. And like I said, we always think long term. You need consistency. You cannot be a one product wonder. You need to do it across the board. And lastly, you have to have staying power or stamina. So when we go through when we look back and go through what we've done over the years, those five things stick to mind. The ability to work as a team, the ability to be innovative. I mean, maybe it's simple things like extending your banking hours well into the evening so that you're able to service more. The determination to do that, because it's not going to be easy. Then the consistency. You have to do things good in all aspects every time. And then the stamina. So you have to have longevity. Now, where do we take the bank? Where we are now? I mean, like I said, 65 to 70% of our population is financially excluded or still needs financial inclusion. So in itself, the local market offers a lot to us. Then we need to look at expanding what I call the bookends. The microfinance on one side and the wealth management on the other side. But again, our philosophy is to play up our relationship franchise rather than our product franchise. So we'll probably do more collaboration in the future. Partner with somebody who can provide us with the expertise and the scale, and we make sure we're able to offer that to our customers so we remain fresh to them. Lastly, I think one of the things that we've embarked on, which is still enjoying a low penetration here, is the concept of protection or insurance. You know, we are in the business of banking, and banking is about savings. You and I save for something. Insurance is plan B. For most people, they don't think of plan B. So the value proposition is, how do we help them manage their finances with all the tools that we can offer them? So given those priorities we have, I think we're all set for the next 5 years.
Well, thank you, Nestor. That's a very comprehensive roadmap for the bank. And then in terms of the attributes that you mentioned, I wrote them down over here: teamwork, determination, consistency, innovation, and stamina. I think these will be the hallmarks of any successful career and any successful organization.
Well, we need to always get reminded that those are the things we need. That's why we have a saying here: if you're successful, savor it for 10 minutes, then get back to work.
Right, yeah. We should not rest on our laurels.
Yeah.
So, Nestor, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Really appreciate your making time for what has been a very thought-provoking session. I'm sure our audience would really value the perspectives, the experience, and the insight that you've been able to share in the last 30 minutes or so. And I personally look forward to doing this again on a new and a different topic. And thank you to all the attendees for making the time to attend. I'm sure that there was very much in the conversation that you could take away, for your own discussions. Do feel free to come back to view the recording. Look out for the follow-up mail from our team, and please feel free to share the same with your colleagues as well. I hope you will stay tuned to Finacle Conclave and enjoy the many high-quality speakers and discussions lined up for you. Do have a look at the agenda on the event landing page for the details. Thank you again, and thank you, Nestor.
Thank you. My pleasure.